The meeting is called to order. Please stand for the singing of national anthem and remain standing for a minute of prayer.
Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupit, di ka pasisingil. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bahaw, may nilang ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nakikinig. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa ay magdidilim. Lupa ng banaw na aming ligaya dapat may mamatin ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
May we recognize Speaker Ferdinand Martin G. Romualdez for his opening remarks.
Esteemed Deputy Speakers, Honorable Majority Leader and Minority Leader, distinguished guests, Secretary Amina Pangandaman of the Department of Budget and Management, Secretary Arsenio N. Balisacan of the National Economic and Development Authority, Secretary Ralph C. Recto of the Department of Finance, Governor Eliam Remoliona of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. Ladies and gentlemen, today we begin to perform our constitutional duty to exercise the power of the purse, a delicate but significant mandate that entails thorough and prudent scrutiny of the proposed national budget for the fiscal year 2025. The national budget is a critical tool for steering our country's development path. It not only determines how resources are allocated, but also sets the policy direction for economic growth, social equity, and environmental sustainability. As we proceed, we are fortunate to have the opportunity of listening to our esteemed guests as they elucidate on the process of formulating the 6.352 trillion National Expenditure Program. The proposed 2025 national budget is anchored on the theme, Agenda for Prosperity, fulfilling the needs and aspirations of the Filipino people. Our aim is to achieve judicious results that uphold the advancements made in the previous years and align with the government's economic and social transformation objectives, as outlined in the 8-point socio-economic agenda and the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028. Under the proposed budget, the spending priorities follow the 3 pillars of the Philippine Development Plan, which aim to, number 1, develop and protect the capabilities of individuals and families. Number 2, transform production sectors to generate more quality jobs and competitive products. And number 3, create an enabling environment by ensuring macroeconomic stability, improving bureaucratic efficiency, and practicing good governance, among other key strategies. Malinaw ang direksyon ng budget natin sa taong 2025. Siguruhin ang patuloy na pag-angat at paglakas ng ekonomiya. Tiyaking natin makikinabang ang lahat ng Pilipino sa pag-unlad na ito at patibayin ang mabuting pamamahalaan para sa kabutihan ng lahat. Higher by 10.1% compared to the 5.768 trillion 2024 national budget and amounts to 22% of our country's gross domestic product. This year's post-budget prioritizes comprehensive growth, covering key sectors that require the most attention. On top of the priority list is education, with an allocation of 977.6 billion pesos. Public Works with 900 billion pesos. Health with 297.6 billion pesos. Interior and Local Government with 278.4 billion pesos. Defense with 256.1 billion. Social Welfare with 230.1 billion, agriculture with 211.3 billion, transportation with 180.9 billion, the judiciary with 63.6 billion, and justice with 40.6 billion. In the coming weeks, we shall engage in scrutinizing, clarifying, and deliberating on the smallest details of the proposed 2025 national budget. As we fulfill this fundamental constitutional task, we must recognize the importance of promoting human and social development. Reducing vulnerabilities and protecting purchasing power are essential. We need to increase income earning ability and ensure macroeconomic activity. Expanding inclusive and innovative finance is crucial. Upgrading infrastructure, ensuring peace and security, and promoting trade investments are vital. We must also accelerate climate action and modernize agriculture. In the performance of our duty to allocate our financial resources, we bear the utmost responsibility to ensure that the budget proposals of every department and agency correspond with the welfare and advancement of the Filipino people and target their priorities and needs. We must safeguard the country's resources by apportioning them in an equitable, efficient, and considerate manner. To harness its full potential, we must adhere to 3 fundamental principles: fiscal discipline, strategic allocation, and operational efficiency. Fiscal discipline is essential to ensure that our expenditures and budget deficits remain within sustainable limits. The discipline safeguards our economic stability and prevents the pitfalls of unmanageable debt and financial crises. Likewise, it is critical for Congress to exercise vigilance and guarantee that the allocation is utilized in accordance with its intended purpose. We must ensure that every peso is judiciously allocated and spent and will go to programs that greatly benefit the Filipino people. Bawat piso may kaakibat na programa at proyekto. Bawat piso, tiyak na may pakinabang sa lahat ng Pilipino. Strategic allocation is equally important as it directs our resources to the areas where they will have the greatest impact. It involves making tough decisions to prioritize programs and initiatives that promise the highest economic and social returns. This ensures that every peso spent contributes to our national goals and the well-being of all our citizens. The budget is the best tool we have to ensure that all our people, especially the poor, feel the tangible benefits of our economic achievements. It is through the careful and strategic allocation of resources that we can ensure every citizen has a stake in the country's development. Ahanin natin ang pag-unlad kung hindi naman makikinabang ang ordinaryong Pilipino. Para saan ang magandang numero ng ekonomiya kung hindi ito mararamdaman ng mahirap nating kababayan? By prioritizing programs that uplift the most vulnerable and provide essential services, the budget serves as a bridge connecting our economic successes with the daily lives of our people. It is a testament to our commitment to inclusivity and equity, ensuring that the progress we make as a nation is shared by all. Malinaw ang misyon natin sa pag-aaral ng 2025 budget. Ibabalik natin lahat sa mga Pilipino ang buwis na nakukolekta sa pamagitan ng mga programa at proyektong may pakinabang sila. Titiyakin natin na ang serbisyo ng gobyerno ay para sa lahat. Sabay-sabay ang pag-angat. Walang mahuhuli, walang maiwan. The House of Representatives plays a crucial and indispensable role in shaping the government's policy-making direction. Let us use this influence cautiously by promoting transparency and accountability. I am determined that with your diligence, we could strengthen the capacity of the government to secure the future of our nation. Ladies and gentlemen of this revered chamber, I implore all of you to engage in open discussions during the deliberations while maintaining patience and understanding towards one another. It is my hope that we reach the intricate balance between the functions of the executive and the legislative branches for the betterment of the nation. Let us engage in this process with the utmost integrity and a deep-seated commitment to transparency and accountability, ensuring that our decisions today will lead to a brighter, more equitable tomorrow for all. I also enjoined all of you to pass the national budget before the session adjourns in September and transmit the same to the Senate. Our fellow citizens rely on our dedication and competence to deliver the highest standard of public service. We must ensure that we do not fail them. Let us promptly take action and get to work. Maraming salamat po.
Honorable Speaker Martin G. Romualdez, esteemed colleagues, distinguished members of the Development Budget Coordination Committee, mga kababayan, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. I'm privileged to welcome you to this important budget briefing. We are here to review and discuss the basis of the proposed national budget of 6.352 trillion pesos for fiscal year 2025 and the revenue sources by which to finance and support it. This is a crucial step for the Committee on Appropriations to come up with a general appropriations bill. Our duty is to ensure that our nation's financial resources are allocated effectively and responsibly to meet the needs and aspirations of our people. The proposed national budget is more than just a financial document. It reflects our priorities, commitments, and vision for the future. It outlines the government's plan to stimulate economic growth, enhance social services, improve infrastructures, and ensure sustainable development. In these challenging times, a well-crafted budget is essential for addressing our country's pressing issues, from economic recovery to social equity and food security. The Development Budget Coordinating Committee plays a pivotal role in crafting this budget. The DBCC's expertise and insights are instrumental in the decisions we will make to shape a realistic budget. As we discuss details of the proposed allocations, we must recognize the thorough analysis and careful planning undertaken for each line item. DBCC members from BSP, NEDA, DOF, and DBM will outline the scope of fiscal planning undertaken on the proposed budget. They will also present the budget's key components, including revenue projections, financing strategies, and expenditure priorities. As we embark on this crucial task, let us approach it with a sense of responsibility and urgency. Our goal is to approve a budget that not only meets the immediate needs of our constituents, but also the foundation for long-term growth and prosperity, consisting with our vision under Ambition 2040. I am confident that we will achieve this goal with your expertise and dedication. My sincerest gratitude to the DBCC members for their hard work and commitment in preparing this budget. I also want to thank all of you for your presence and active participation. Together, let us ensure that the proposed national budget reflects our shared vision and commitment to the betterment of our country. Before we proceed with the DBCC presentation, I yield the chair to our distinguished chairperson, Estela Luz Kimbo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 1 minute suspension. The budget briefing is hereby resumed. Mr. Chair, distinguished colleagues in Congress, members of the DBCC, fellow public servants, magandang umaga po. Ngayong umaga, tayo ay nagtitipon upang suriin ang mga macroeconomic assumptions na bumubuo sa iminumungkahing pambansang programa sa paggastos para sa taong 2025 na nagkakahalaga ng 6.352 trillion pesos. Narito ang DBCC upang ipresenta ang mga mahalagang detalye at sama-sama nating susuriin ang mga implikasyon nito. Una sa lahat, ating tatanungin, ano ba ang inaasahang economic growth na susuportahan ng pambansang budget na ito? Paano natin itutulak ang ating ekonomiya tungo sa isang bagong Pilipinas? Isa pang mahalagang aspeto ay ang laban sa kahirapan. Ilang porsyento ng ating populasyon ang nananatiling nasa ibaba ng poverty line at ano na ang ating naging pag-unlad mula noong pandemya. What are the target inflation rates that our policymakers need to achieve to ensure stability of prices for basic commodities? What is the impact on our national budget of fluctuations in the exchange rate? Additionally, we must consider the sustainable level of the budget deficit. If we shall spend more than what we earn, which means we need to borrow, how will additional borrowing impact our debt to GDP ratio through 2028? Can we manage to service our current stock of debt without sacrificing our long-term growth? Are we on the right path to achieving our goal of becoming an upper middle income nation by 2028? While these goals are articulated in our medium-term fiscal framework, it is essential to ask, are we on track? We were the hardest hit in the ASEAN during the pandemic, with our growth rate plummeting to minus 9.6% in 2020. We experienced the longest lockdown and the highest job losses. Now, 30 months after the official end of the pandemic, we must ask, have we achieved a full, clear, and sustainable economic recovery? Have all sectors of our economy restored their productive capacity to pre-pandemic levels? Dagdag pa rito, kailangan natin suriin ang tagumpay ng ating mga programa sa ayuda. Nakatulong ba ang mga ito sa mga Pilipinong iniahon natin mula sa laylayan ng ating lipunan? Kung tayong ay nakabangon mula sa pandemya at naipatupad ang mga komprehensibong programa sa social protection, handa na ba ang ekonomiya ng Pilipinas upang yakapin ang nakasaad sa 2023 Philippine Development Plan na Transition Agenda? Handa na ba tayo para sa paglalakbay patungo sa bagong Pilipinas? Our actions against the effects of climate change must be clear and concrete, demonstrating the government's preparedness for disasters. Pag dumating ang susunod na Ondoy o Karina, wala na kayang baha dahil na-implement na natin ang matagal nang nakalatag na plano para sa malawakang flood control? While our infrastructure projects are impressive, it is essential to show how these initiatives directly benefit the daily lives of Filipinos. And while we proudly highlight the reduction in crime rates and our steadfast efforts to maintain peace, we must also acknowledge the challenges that remain. Kasama dito ang pagdepensa sa soberanya ng ating bansa at ng West Philippine Sea. As we continue to embrace digitalization and technological advancements, we must ensure these innovations bring real and tangible benefits to ordinary Filipinos. It is not just about having the latest technology, it is about having these advancements improve the daily lives of our people. From the farmer in the fields, to the teacher in the classroom, to the small business owner in the market, dapat maramdaman ng bawat Pilipino ang benepisyo ng makabagong teknolohiya sa bagong Pilipinas. Increasing employment rates and wages are important, but we must ensure that these translate to genuine improvements in job quality and living standards. Kaya't mahalaga na nababantayan ang presyo ng bigas, while external factors such as global conflicts and El Nino affect rice prices, we must also focus on local policies and actions to mitigate these effects, ensuring that the government takes full responsibility. Clear steps are necessary to achieve sufficient rice supply. Support for farmers and fisherfolk is crucial, and we must think carefully about the best way to deliver this support, the one that produces the most improvements in yields. These are the critical questions we must ponder as we listen to the DBCC's report on the key principles of the 2025 National Expenditure Program. Kailangan natin tiyakin na ang pag-unlad ng ekonomiya ay nagiging tunay at konkretong benepisyo para sa bawat Pilipino. Hindi lang dapat magpakita ng pag-unlad ng ating mga numero, kundi maramdaman din ng bawat mamamayan sa kanilang pang-araw-araw na buhay na tunay na sumasalamin ng kaunlaran ng ating bansa. Sama-sama po tayong kumilos dahil ang mas maliwanag na kinabukasan ng bawat Pilipino ay ang tanda ng isang tunay ng bagong Pilipinas. Maraming salamat po. Committee Secretary, kindly acknowledge the resource persons and guests present today.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. From the Department of Budget and Management, Secretary Amina Pangandaman, Undersecretary Janet Abuel, Undersecretary Mary Ann de la Vega, Undersecretary Rolando Toledo, Undersecretary Maria Francesca del Rosario, Undersecretary Leo Angelo Larcia, Assistant Secretary Leonido Polido III, Assistant Secretary Romeo Matthew Balangkit, Assistant Secretary Clarito Alejandro Magsino, Assistant Secretary Ramon Vicente Asuncion. From the Department of Finance, Secretary Ralph G. Recto, Undersecretary Maria Lualhati Dorotan Tioseco, Undersecretary Domini Velasquez, Undersecretary Renato Reside Jr., Undersecretary Charlito Martin Mendoza, Undersecretary Catherine Fong, Undersecretary Rolando Tungpalan, Undersecretary Joven Balbosa, Undersecretary Bayani Agabin, Undersecretary Maria Edita Tan, Undersecretary Nino Raymond Alvina, Assistant Secretary Angelica Sarmiento, Assistant Secretary Jais Briones, Assistant Secretary Donaline Minimo, Assistant Secretary Eufronsinio Bernabe Jr., Assistant Secretary Carlo Fermin Adriano, Assistant Secretary Gerald Alan Quebral, Assistant Secretary Dakila Eltin Napao, Assistant Secretary Juvi Danofrata, Treasurer of the Philippines Sharon P. Almanza, BIR Commissioner Romeo Lumagi Jr., Bureau of Customs Commissioner Bienvenido Rubio. From the National Economic and Development Authority, Secretary Arsenio Balisacan, Undersecretary Rosemary Idilion, Undersecretary Joseph Capuno, Undersecretary Melbourne Pana, Assistant Secretary Roderick Planta, Assistant Secretary Jonathan Uy. From the Tariff Commission, Chairperson Marilu Mendoza. From the PSA, National Statistician, Undersecretary Claire Dennis Mapa. From the PPP Center, Deputy Executive Director Jeffrey Manalo. From the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Governor Eli Remolona Jr., Deputy Governor Francisco Daquila Jr., and from the Office of the President, Representative for the DBCC, Secretary Frederick Go. That's all, Madam Chair.
The order of presentations is as follows. We will begin with the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, to be followed by the NADA. Third would be the DOF, and finally the DBM. But to formally begin the presentation of the DBCC, the chair recognizes Secretary Pangandaman.
Good morning. We will go straight to the presentation of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. Governor Eli.
Honorable Speaker Martin Romualdez, Honorable Chair of the Committee on Appropriations Elizalde Co, Madam Chair Stella Kimbo, Honorable Representatives present at today's briefing, it is my privilege to present our assessment of the monetary and external sector performance of the country. This is to provide the economic context for the macroeconomic assumptions behind the proposed national government budget for fiscal year 2025. Let me start with price stability. In recent years, the Philippines has been affected by an unusual succession of large supply shocks. These shocks changed the dynamics of inflation, and these were reflected in the changing roles of the various components of our CPI basket. In early 2022, these supply shocks showed up largely in energy prices. This is shown in the yellow part of the graph. Later, it was food prices other than rice, and this is shown in the blue part of the graph. These shocks led to the highest inflation rate we had seen in decades. Since August 2023, however, inflation has been dominated by rice prices. This is shown in the red part of the graph. If inflation were driven just by demand, there would be a more even distribution of these different components of inflation. The recent development with regard to rice prices is important because the price of rice is a salient price. In our surveys, when people worry about higher prices, and when we ask them why, over 90% will say it's because of the price of rice. Indeed, there is strong empirical evidence that suggests that rice prices affect inflation expectations to a very large extent. And these inflation expectations lead to second-round effects. This is why the recent government decision in EO 62 to reduce the tariff on rice will be so helpful in our efforts to tame inflation. In the BSP's latest forecast, the rice tariff reduction will have a very significant downside impact on the inflation trajectory until 2025. Let me now say a bit more about our inflation projections. The chart on the left shows the BSP's forecasts on inflation over the coming months. The darkest part in the middle of the blue graph indicates that we expect average inflation to fall within our target range of 2 to 4% in 2024 and 2025. The balance of risks to this latest inflation outlook has shifted to the downside, and this is due largely to the implementation of rice tariff reduction. We still face some upside risks for inflation. These risks will come from higher domestic prices of food items other than rice, from transport charges, and from electricity rates. On the right side, we show the trend in inflation expectations based on our survey of external forecasters. The green line shows how inflation expectations for 2024 have evolved. The blue and red lines are expectations about future inflation rates in 2025 and 2026. The surveys show inflation expectations are well anchored, implying that we have to worry less about second-round effects of supply shocks. The evolving inflation conditions show that the BSP can hold its policy settings steady for the time being. If price pressures continue to ease, it will be possible for the BSP to consider a less restrictive monetary policy stance. Nonetheless, lingering supply concerns and geopolitical risks warrant continued and close monitoring of risks to the inflation outlook. The national government's policies and programs play an important part in helping ease inflation pressures. Shown here are some of the short-term government initiatives to improve food supply that are expected to help. One is tariff modification and importation measures, a prominent example of which is EO 62. There is also the strong push to enhance productivity through the provision of high-quality seeds, farm and fishery gear and equipment, and other policies that address supply issues. Along with price stability, the BSP assigns high priority to financial stability. I'm pleased to report that our banks are in good shape. Their balance sheets are strong, their operations are profitable, and they are very liquid. The graph shows that our banks remain well capitalized and highly liquid. The chart on the left, the brown bar, refers to international standards for capital adequacy, and the dark purple bar refers to the bank's actual capital adequacy. As you can see, the actual capital that banks hold exceeds very significantly international standards for capital. The chart on the right shows the liquidity coverage of our banks. The brown bar is the international standard for liquidity. The actual liquidity held by our banks is much higher, as shown by the dark blue bar. These conditions show that our banks are still in a good position to support growth. I am also pleased to report that more Filipinos continue to join the formal financial system. The chart on the left shows that the share of digital payments in total transactions has reached 52.8%, surpassing our target of 50% under the Digital Payments Transformation Roadmap for 2018 to 2023. The chart on the right shows that account ownership among Filipino adults almost doubled to 56% in 2021 from 29% in 2019. This significant increase was driven by the pandemic-induced shift to digital financial services, particularly e-money account ownership, which was 8% in 2019 and is now 36%. Let me now turn to external inflows. The external sector is a picture of resilience. We have sufficient inflows to maintain an ample level of international reserves, which are our defense against external shocks. The biggest inflows are from remittances. That's shown on the chart on the left. and then business process outsourcing, which is the chart in the middle. As you can see, they are increasing. In contrast, while we continue to record net foreign direct investment inflows, these have weakened in the recent past. Nonetheless, we expect our inflows to rise even further next year and continue to contribute to building up our reserves. This chart shows the level of our international reserves. It averaged $101 billion in the last 5 years. We expect that it will reach $104 billion this year. These reserves are more than ample to defend the country against external shocks. Having presented the macroeconomic backdrop, here are the assumptions behind the proposed national budget for fiscal year 2025. We assume, based on our forecasts, that headline inflation will remain within our target range of between 2 to 4% for both 2024 and 2025. We assume that the price of Dubai crude oil will be within $65 to $85 per barrel based on Dubai crude oil futures prices. We assume that the exchange rate of the peso will be within 55 and 58 pesos against the US dollar. We also assume that the one-year T-bill rate will be between 4.5% and 5.5%. The 6-month SOFR, which is the global benchmark short rate in US dollars, is assumed to be between 3.5 and 4.5%. Finally, we assume our exports will grow by 6% and our imports by 5% as global demand recovers and as international trade normalizes. Let me end by saying that the BSP will continue to support policies that promote price stability, financial stability, and an efficient payments and settlement system, which we think are essential for sustainable and inclusive growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Remolona. The chair now recognizes Director General Secretary Balisacan.
Honorable Speaker Martin Romualdez, Honorable Chairperson Elizal Deco, and Senior Vice Chairperson Stella Kimbo of the Committee on Appropriations, other honorable members of the House of Representatives, colleagues in government, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the DBCC, please allow me to brief you on the updates of the Philippine Development Plan, or PDP, the country's recent economic performance outlook, and an overview of the country's socioeconomic development.
Sec RC, could you speak closer to the mic? Thank you.
Thank you. This slide shows the flow of my presentation. For context, I will start with a quick review of the PDP 2023 to 2028. This will be followed by discussion of the country's recent economic performance to assess our current situation. Then I will proceed with the growth outlook over the medium term. Finally, I will end with an overview of our priorities for next year. If you recall, the Marcos administration launched the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028 in January of 2023. This plan for deep economic and social transformation is the second medium-term development blueprint to be anchored on the National Long-Term Vision or Ambition Natin 2040. The overall strategy framework of the PDP focuses on the social sectors for human capital development, as shown on the red section of your screen, the production sectors for the generation of higher quality jobs and competitive products, as shown in the green section, and enabling physical, policy, and regulatory environment for socioeconomic development, as shown in the blue section. The PDP socioeconomic transformation is a crucial step towards realizing the Vision Natin 2040. This vision of a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient Philippines is our ultimate goal, promoting a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay for all Filipinos. The PDP prioritizes these 6 items on the transformation agenda. 1, we're accelerating the country's digital transformation to enable the government to deliver services more efficiently and effectively while reducing corruption and improving transparency. 2, we are building better connections between places through technology and infrastructure to link markets, cities, and rural areas, and leading and lagging regions to make it easier for people to access jobs, healthcare, and education. 3, the government will intensify even further its partnership with the private sector, not only in terms of utilizing public-private partnership or PPP, a mode of financing, but also in improving overall economic performance or governance. 4, we aim to strengthen intersectoral linkages and harness the outputs from our vibrant services sectors, for example, marketing, advertising, creative design, e-commerce, among others, to create greater value for our products. 5th, we recognize that innovation is a crucial driver of long-term economic growth and improvements in the overall quality of life. Hence, we're laying the foundations and enabling mechanisms for a dynamic innovation ecosystem that will allow us to maximize the potential of innovation actors, all innovation actors. 6th and last, given our experience during the COVID-19 pandemic and with the Mandanas-Garcia ruling and the government's devolution initiative, we recognize the importance of enhancing the capabilities and capacities of local government units as partners in development. Now, allow me to discuss the detail of our recent economic performance. The Philippine economy expanded by 5.7% in the first quarter of 2024, coming from a high base of 6.4% GDP growth in first quarter of 2023, and picking up from 5.5% in the fourth quarter of 2023. Among major emerging economies in the region, the Philippines posted one of the fastest growth during this period, next only to India at 7.8%, equal to Vietnam at 5.7%, but ahead of China at 5.3%, Indonesia 5.1%, Malaysia 3.9%, and Thailand 1.3%. We will release the second quarter growth performance later this week. We expect the economy to have remained strong and maintained our regional growth standing. And in the demand side, export growth rebounded to 7.5% in the first quarter of 2024 due to faster growth in electronics exports. Meanwhile, domestic demand continued to expand, albeit moderating to 3.6% in the first quarter of 2024. Household spending eased to 4.6% amid the sweltering heat indices and elevated food prices. Total investment marginally grew by 1.3% amid less favorable business sentiment due to the lag effect of policy rate hikes. Similarly, government expenditure growth remained muted at 1.7%. On the production side of the economy, the industry sector drove growth, expanding by 5.1%. The upbeat performance of manufacturing led the sector's growth. Meanwhile, the growth in services sector moderated to 6.9% due to the slowdown in transport and storage, as growth in tourism-related sectors started to normalize. The agriculture sector posted weak growth, mainly due to the impact of El Nino, as livestock and palay production declined. Nonetheless, on the demand side, total investments already surpassed its pre-pandemic levels in the first quarter of 2024. On the supply side, most sectors exceeded their pre-pandemic levels, except for mining and quarrying and real estate. The total share to GDP of these sectors below pre-pandemic levels is 6.4%. Real GDP per capita growth rose to 4.8% in the first quarter of 2024 from 4.6% in the fourth quarter of 2023. It is now over 10% higher than its pre-pandemic levels. The May 2024 labor force survey results show that the Philippine labor market continued to improve, with an additional 605,000 jobs created year over year, driven by employment expansion in the industry and services sectors. The unemployment rate dropped to 4.1% from 4.3% in May 2023. Meanwhile, the underemployment rate reached a low of 9.9%, the lowest rate recorded since 2005. The decline is equivalent to 846,000 fewer underemployed individuals, mainly from the reduction in visibly underemployed individuals. The June 2024 labor force survey results will come out on Wednesday this week. We expect the labor market to continue exhibiting robust performance. Approved foreign investments in the first quarter of 2024 contracted by 63.6% to 148.4 billion pesos from 408.2 billion pesos in first quarter of 2023, mainly owing to base effects, given a significant amount committed by Germany and the Netherlands in the first quarter of 2023. Over 70% of the total approved foreign investment was directed towards the energy sector. Meanwhile, net foreign direct investment inflows grew by 18.7% from January to April 2024. This growth reflects an improvement in investor confidence amid global uncertainties. In 2023, net FDI declined as concerns over subdued global outlook and geopolitical risk weighed on investors' investment plans. As of June 14, 2024, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas anticipates net FDI to reach $9.5 billion following first quarter solid figures and support from the ongoing operationalization of the implementing rules and regulations of crucial investment reforms to provide a more conducive business environment in the country. As reported by Governor Eli Remolona, the country's overall inflation is to 3.7% in June 2024 from 3.9% in May 2024, as non-food inflation declined while food inflation accelerated. Inflation of food and non-alcoholic beverages increased to 6.1% in June 2024 from 5.8% in May 2024. As noted, this was driven by faster inflation in other food products. Rice inflation is for the third consecutive month but remained elevated. Meanwhile, non-food inflation slowed to 2.3% in June 2024 from 2.6% in the preceding month, driven by the broad-based deceleration across most non-food commodity groups. The Philippine Statistics Authority will release the inflation report for July 2024 tomorrow. Since mid-2022, inflation has been mainly driven by food inflation, as again emphasized by Dr. Eli earlier. The contribution of food inflation further increased in the third quarter of 2023 due to the increases in the price of rice. We zoom into the food inflation the next slide. Similar graph that you have seen in the earlier presentation of PSP, since September 2023, rice has ranked as the top driver of food inflation. In June 2024, food inflation remained driven mainly by rice. Other contributors include vegetables, meat, and ready-made food products. The 2023 full-year official poverty statistics released by the Philippine Statistics Authority showed that the 2023 poverty incidence among the population significantly dropped to 15.5% from 18.1% in 2021. This translates to a decrease of 2.45 million Filipinos living in poverty. With this, we surpassed the PDP target of 16.0 to 16.4% for 2023. Meanwhile, food poor Filipinos saw a significant decline as well, dropping from 6.5 million in 2021 to 4.84 million in 2023, a decrease of 1.7 million individuals. I note that this performance could have been even more impressive if not for the elevated prices or high inflation that the country faced in recent months, particularly in 2023. Let me now discuss our growth outlook. On June 27, 2024, the Development Budget Coordination Committee maintained the economic growth targets given the emerging domestic and global developments. We expect the Philippine economy to expand by 6 to 7% in 2024, 6.5 to 7.5% in 2025, and 6.5 to 8.0% in 2026 up to 2028. Based on the latest data, the country is estimated to still surpass the upper middle income threshold by 2025. Provided, of course, that the economy grows by at least the low end of the country's growth target and that the average foreign exchange during this period does not exceed 58 pesos per the US dollar. Otherwise, reaching the UMIC status could be delayed to 2026. Easing inflation, sustained improvement in labor market conditions, and stable remittance growth will support household spending. The government will also continue implementing measures to address the elevated prices of rice and select food items and ensure food security to protect Filipinos' purchasing power. Despite its fiscal consolidation strategy, government spending will support growth by improving efficiency in delivering priority programs and projects. The Marcos administration will ensure the timely implementation of programs and projects under the fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 national budget. We also hope for the timely passage of the fiscal year 2025 national budget. In addition, the full implementation of the new Government Procurement Act will improve efficiency in government procurement, ensure value for money, and enhance the quality of public services. Capital formation will continue to expand in 2024, supported mainly by robust construction activities through the government's Build Better More program and the Pambansang Pabahay para sa Pilipino, or for PH, the government's national housing program. Implementing the PPP Code of the Philippines is also expected to strengthen and facilitate greater private sector participation in the country's infrastructure development. The government will continue to implement pro-investment reforms fully and further improve the ease of doing business in the country, encourage business expansion and new investment in emerging and priority areas. On the external front, the country will continue to forge strategic foreign trade investments with other markets. For the current year, the Philippines is looking to advance bilateral FTAs with the EU, European Union, the United Arab Emirates, and India. Meanwhile, the country should also take advantage of the U.S. CHIPS Act, which will assist in improving the country's product assembly, testing, and packaging. Strengthening and tapping new tourism ties through bilateral agreements, such as with Japan and Qatar, is also a welcome development to spur growth in the country's exports of tourism services. Nevertheless, we need to be mindful of the domestic and external risks that could challenge our growth outlook. Extreme natural disasters, worsened by climate change, may halt growth in the agriculture sector. Risk related to inflation, such as potential adjustments in fare, wage, and service utility fees, had the potential to significantly curb spending. It is imperative that we carefully consider these factors in our economic planning and decision-making processes. The possible spread of other highly infectious animal diseases, similar to the African swine fever, poses downside risk. The passage of tax or revenue-eroding measures could threaten the country's fiscal stability. Delays in enacting critical reforms could also undermine the sustainability of long-term economic growth. The weak absorptive capacity of implementing agencies and local government units may also delay the implementation of programs and projects outlined in the fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 national budget. Prior experience in 2023 underscored the importance of addressing implementation issues to prevent underspending and minimize adverse impact or the adverse impact on growth. The projected rapid economic growth, particularly with the implementation of the 4PH program, could lead to upward inflationary pressure and stall economic gains. It is essential that we complement this growth with corresponding improvements in the labor force and capital accumulation to ensure sustained economic progress. On the external front, the global economic slowdown may weaken external demand, and growing geopolitical and trade tensions could lead to supply chain disruptions. General elections in major economies may also trigger political shifts that can disrupt trade and investment. Given all this, how do we intend to achieve the growth we have set for 2025? To boost growth next year, the Marcos administration will continue to implement the strategies we have set in the Philippine Development Plan, guided by the lessons we have identified in the Philippine Development Report 2023. For fiscal year 2025, the government will focus on promoting social development and transformation. We recognize the importance of addressing learning losses and will implement programs to boost health, establish livable communities, and strengthen social protection, supporting educators in their crucial role. Recognizing the importance that agriculture plays in the supply side of the economy, the government will continue prioritizing programs that will help improve the sector's productivity. Meanwhile, infrastructure development has been and will continue to be the top priority of the government. Lastly, we will continue to ensure sound macroeconomic fundamentals through prudent fiscal management and enhanced bureaucratic efficiency. Over the medium to long term, we need critical reforms to sustain the country's economic growth and development. In this regard, we are optimistic about the passage of the following top priority bills identified by the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council, or LEDAC. These measures are critical in strengthening the country's economic governance, accelerating the implementation of infrastructure flagship projects, and maintaining fiscal sustainability. All this will contribute to our achievement of socioeconomic transformation under a bagong Pilipinas as we work toward a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay para sa lahat. That concludes my presentation, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Balisacan. The Chair now recognizes our Finance Secretary, the Honorable Ralph Recto.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for this opportunity to brief the House of Representatives, my former classmates and seatmates, about the national government's fiscal position. A discussion of our fiscal prospects requires an appreciation of the context within which we are operating, especially the global trends that heavily influence our course forward. So allow me to provide these briefly. To start with, we are still recovering from the pandemic that dealt us the hardest economic blow since post-World War II. And against this backdrop, we navigate an ocean of global uncertainties due to geopolitical tensions, two hot wars, a trade war, and a looming Cold War. For instance, before the Russian-Ukraine war broke out in early 2022, a time when the economic team crafted the first medium-term fiscal framework, the global economy was expected to rebound post-pandemic. But these geopolitical tensions disrupted this recovery, with inflation skyrocketing in almost all economies due to higher commodity prices. Central banks raised interest rates in response, leading to moderated growth expectations globally. Just like every other country, we feel the weight of these global pressures. That is why, when I took on the Finance Secretary hat, my first priority was to recalibrate our growth and fiscal targets to ensure that they are achievable and adaptable to external shocks. Our refined medium-term fiscal program reduces our deficit and debt gradually in a realistic manner, while creating more jobs, increasing our people's incomes, and decreasing poverty in the process. And under this, we have ensured that every peso to be collected or borrowed will be stretched to deliver the biggest bang per buck for the Filipino people. To put it into perspective, our 2024 budget, as per the JA, stands at 5.77 trillion pesos, of which only 4.27 trillion pesos are supportable by revenues. Thus, on a daily basis, our expenditures amount to 15.8 billion pesos a day, of which 11.7 billion pesos will be financed by revenue collections and the rest, 4.1 billion pesos, by loans every 24 hours, kada 24 na oras. So against this Herculean task of funding a gargantuan budget, we needed to scout for more resources without inflicting new taxes on the present, considering the period of high inflation in the last 2 years, or bequeathing debts to be paid by future generations. That is why this year the DOF hiked GOCC's dividend rates to 75% from 50%, which is now one of our major sources of non-tax revenue. The BIR and BOC have also stepped up with higher collection performances through digitalization, strict enforcement, and plugging of leakages in the tax system, especially from e-commerce. So far, we are on track to meet our fiscal program for the year, having already achieved half of our targets. As of mid-year, total revenues grew by 15.6% to 2.15 trillion pesos, of which tax collections from the BIR and BOC totaled 1.84 trillion pesos, 10% higher than last year. Non-tax revenues recorded a 63.3% growth, totaling 314.2 billion pesos. This robust revenue performance placed us among Asia's top revenue to GDP ratios at 15.3% for the first quarter of 2024. Our expenditures also grew by 14.6% in the first half of the year, reaching 2.76 trillion pesos. Our fiscal deficit for the first half stood at 613.9 billion pesos, way below the mid-year target. As a percentage of GDP, our deficit remains very manageable at 4.5% in the first quarter. Over the medium term, we anticipate a 10.3% average annual growth in total revenues to support our people's growing needs. Revenues as a percentage of GDP will also increase from 16.1% in 2024 to 17% in 2028. Specifically, tax collections are expected to rise by 11.8% annually, driven by projected double-digit collection growths of the BIR and BOC. This will outpace the roughly 8.7% average increase of our nominal GDP every year from 2024 to 2028. This means that we are asking the BIR and BOC to work harder and boost efficiency at a faster pace. By 2028, the tax effort will rise to 16.3% from 14.4% in 2024. These projections took into account the additional revenues from the refined revenue reforms of the DOF, which we recalibrated to ensure that they do not place undue burdens on the taxpayers. Disbursements, on the other hand, are expected to grow by an average of 7.4% and remain at about 21.1% of GDP. With higher government revenue collections and improved expenditure management, our fiscal deficit is projected to drop from 5.6% in 2024 to 3.7% by 2028. Spending, of course, will continue to prioritize education, infrastructure, food security, social protection, and national security to support our growth momentum. Sisiguraduhin po natin na masinop ang ating paggagastos at babalik sa taong bayan ang bawat sentimong nalikom. And we continue to manage our debt according to the highest standards of fiscal discipline, as we are very vigilant not to max out the Philippine National Credit Card. As of June, our gross financing stands at 61% of the full-year goal of 2.57 trillion pesos. This includes our landmark $2 billion global bond issuance last May, which secured one of our most affordable and cost-effective borrowing costs. Our heavy bias on domestic financing has facilitated the continued redenomination of our debt into local currency, now representing 68.3% of our total borrowings. Kaya hindi po kayo dapat mabahala dahil ang utang na ito galing po sa sarili natin. Ibig sabihin, karamihan ng interes na ating binabayad ay napupunta rin lang bilang dagdag na kita ng ating mga kababayan. At napakuhusay ng ating kagawaran ng Ingat Yaman, the Bureau of Treasury. They know what they are doing. We also strategically favor long-term obligations to reduce our reliance on short-term debt and minimize rollover risks. Currently, long-term debts constitute 79.8% of our total portfolio. Sa unang tingin, tila napakalaki ng ating utang na umaabot ng trilyon. Pero uulitin ko, hindi po tayo dapat mabahala dito dahil hindi nasusukat ang utang ng isang bansa base sa pagtingin lang sa aktwal na laki nito. Mas tamang sukatin ang utang ng isang bansa kung iahambing ito sa laki ng kanyang ekonomiya. Dahil dito nalalaman ang kanyang kakayahan na bayaran ito. At isa sa mga ginagamit na tamang panukat ay ang debt to GDP ratio. Ito ay ang porsyento ng utang ng isang bansa kumpara sa laki ng kanyang ekonomiya o ang halaga ng lahat ng produkto at serbisyong nagagawa nito. Base sa chart, mukhang patuloy na lumalaki ang utang ngayon, pero patuloy naman na mas lumalago ang ating ekonomiya. Ibig sabihin, kayang-kaya natin bayaran ang ating mga obligasyon. Kung ating titignan ang debt to GDP ratio ng Pilipinas, unti-unti na natin itong naibababa mula nung pandemic. Mula sa 60.9 noong 2022, bumaba na ito sa 60.1 noong 2023. And we are determined to continue pushing it below 60%. So we have enough buffer in case another crisis hits us. And to be clear, there is nothing inherently wrong with a country having debt, as long as the money is used for the right purposes, such as growing the economy, which in turn creates more jobs, increases income, and provides more revenues for the government. And that as long as the government has the ability to repay these obligations without compromising on other essential projects. In our case, we are using debts to spur our stronger economic recovery by investing in more infrastructure and human capital development projects which have the highest multiplier effect on the economy. It is also important to note that while we are making all of these investments, we are also paying off the pandemic borrowings we inherited from the past administration. In 2019, when the country achieved its lowest debt to GDP ratio, the total nominal debt was only 7.7 trillion pesos. But this figure nearly doubled to around 13.4 trillion pesos right after the pandemic, just as the Marcos Jr. administration took over. And because of all these geopolitical tensions, the cost of our borrowings has climbed post-pandemic as central banks have raised their interest rates to combat inflation. Therefore, we are now refinancing the large borrowings contracted during the low interest rate period in 2020 to 2022 with new debts that bear higher interest rates. This is the reason why our interest payments for next year are higher by around 11%. But while interest rates have gone up, the cost of our borrowing remains manageable and much lower than our GDP growth. In fact, our effective interest rate for next year is only 5.3%, which is very cheap considering that the average term of our debt is 7.5 years. Moreover, if we remove inflation, our real interest rate is only 2.3%, far lower than our expected real GDP growth of 6.5%, which means we are on track to outgrow our debt. As central banks begin lowering policy rates, hopefully starting in the third quarter of 2024, we can expect growth of interest payments to moderate as long as we continue to manage our debt responsibly. The continuous decline in our debt to GDP ratio since the pandemic is one of the reasons why our credit ratings remain high. And having a high credit rating is a major win for all, because this means that we not only have the capacity to pay our debts, but can have more access to cheaper financing. Not just for us in government, but also for private businesses that require access to credit to increase their capital, grow operations, and create more jobs. We are determined to stick to our medium-term fiscal program by exercising the highest level of fiscal prudence, because doing so will also allow us to achieve a credit rating upgrade under this administration. As I wrap up my presentation, let me assure the honorable members of the House of Representatives that we are on track with our fiscal consolidation plan across the board. We are making good, steady progress on our economic goals, and the numbers we have point in that direction. Despite external headwinds, we have grown at an average of 6.1% since President Marcos Jr. took office. This is among the fastest in the region. Our unemployment and underemployment rates are at historic lows. We have 49 million Filipinos employed to date, and 63% of them are engaged in formal and stable jobs. This means our middle class is growing. Inflation is cooling and expected to settle at 3.3% this year. This is within our target range and well below the global average of 5.9% and 8.3% for developing economies, according to the IMF. With favorable conditions, we are on course to become an upper middle income country by 2025. Ibig sabihin nito, makakaasa tayong mas tataas ang kabuuang kita ng bawat Pilipino. And last year, we lifted 2.5 million Filipinos out of poverty, dropping the poverty rate to 15.5%. If we are able to elevate 10 million more Filipinos out above the poverty line, in the next 4 years, we will achieve our goal of reducing the poverty rate to a single digit or 9% by 2028. This is the be-all and end-all of all our efforts, as this is the definitive indicator that our growth has translated into real improvements in the lives of Filipinos through more and better jobs, higher levels of education, and healthier lives. But we cannot achieve this all on our own. Kailangan po namin ang tulong, gabay, at suporta nyo sa Kongreso. To the honorable members of Congress, the 2025 proposed budget of 6.35 trillion pesos that you will enact will help us get there. So as we begin the deliberations for the NEP, let us all together carefully choose projects in the budget that deliver the biggest growth and economic benefits for our people. Let us operate within the parameters of the medium-term fiscal program that reduces our deficit and that gradually creates jobs, increases income, and decreases poverty. And above all, let us never lose sight of our core mission to deliver on the promise of a better life that every Filipino rightfully deserves under Bagong Pilipinas. Maraming salamat po.
Salamat sa mga good news, Sec Ralph. And last but not the least, our Budget Secretary, the Honorable Secretary Amina Pangandaman.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. To House Speaker Ferdinand Martin Romualdez, to the House leadership and members of the House of Representatives, Chair and Senior Vice Chair of the Committee on Appropriations, magandang umaga po. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. On behalf of the Department of Budget and Management and the Development Budget Coordination Committee, or the DBCC, allow me to extend again my heartfelt gratitude to our cabinet members for their dedication and contribution to the preparation of a national budget that is responsive not only to the needs but also to the aspirations of the Filipino people. The proposed national budget for fiscal year 2025 is 6.352 trillion pesos, or equivalent to 22.1% of the GDP and higher by 10.1% to the 2024 budget of 5.768 trillion pesos. As stated by President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. in his third State of the Nation address, we crafted our national budget with utmost care, diligence, and meticulous attention. At the onset, let me share with you that DBM received budget proposals totaling to 9.2 trillion pesos. However, given our limited fiscal space and with our fiscal program in mind, as we try to decrease our deficit and at the same time maximize whatever revenues we raise, we have set the budget ceiling at 6.352 trillion pesos as approved by the DBCC. We also considered several factors in evaluating budget proposals, including the implementation readiness of programs and projects, agencies' absorptive capacity, alignment with the expenditure directions. We also prioritize programs under the 3-year Rolling Infrastructure Program, or TRIP, Information System Strategy Plan, ISSP, and Program Convergence Budgeting, PCB. Budget utilization is always a major consideration, and we note that as of June 30, 2024, 65.4% of the 5.652 trillion allotment for the fiscal year 2024 national budget and the fiscal year 2023 continuing appropriations has been obligated. Out of the 5.652 trillion allotment, 4.147 trillion pesos has been released to national government agencies to implement their programs and projects, 53.8% of which has been obligated. As you may already know, a high budget utilization rate reflects the agency's absorptive capacity to utilize additional funds. And to give you an update, as of June 30, 2024, agencies with the highest obligation rates include the OPAPRU with 84.3%, NICA at 80.4%, DPWH with 70.5%, DOF at 69.6%, DFA at 58.5%, DILG with 56.8%, Commission on Elections with 55.7%, DND with 52.5%, and the DOTR and DA with 51.3%. Meanwhile, a low budget utilization reflects the agency's limited capacity to spend more funds. Hence, just last month, we issued Circular Letter number 2024-12 requiring agencies with low obligation rates to submit their respective catch-up plans to improve the delivery of public goods and services. And we will now also be requiring quarterly progress reports or catch-up plans because the DBM is committed to strictly monitoring agencies' budget utilization and proactively taking steps to improve the government's spending efficiency. In terms of appropriations, the fiscal year 2025 total expenditure program may be classified into program and automatic appropriations. A total of 4.247 trillion pesos or 66.9% will go to program appropriations to cover agency-specific budgets and allocations for special purpose funds. The remaining of 2.105 trillion pesos or 33.1% will be automatically appropriated for government programs authorized under existing laws. In addition to our proposed 6.352 trillion budget, some 158.7 billion will be allocated under program appropriations as standby funds that can only be released when certain conditions are met. This is equivalent to only 2.5% of the proposed fiscal year 2025 budget. Moving on to the dimensions of the proposed fiscal year 2025 national budget, the general expense class, 38.1% of the budget, will go to maintenance and other operating expenses at 2.421 trillion pesos, and this is followed by personnel services expenditures at 1.757 trillion pesos or 27.7%. Meanwhile, capital expenditures will receive 1.327 trillion pesos, while financial expenses will be allocated with 848.1 billion pesos. Bearing in mind our objectives of economic and social transformation, more than half or 62.6% of the national budget will be allocated for both social and economic services. Specifically, the social services sector, which includes education, health, and social protection, will receive the largest allocation of 2.12 trillion pesos, while economic services sector, which includes our Build Better More infrastructure program, will receive 1.85 trillion pesos. In terms of recipient units, the national government agencies will be allocated with 4.116 trillion pesos or 64.8% of the fiscal year 2025 budget. This will cover the requirements of banner programs and priority projects implemented by line departments and agencies. This also includes special purpose funds such as the Miscellaneous Personal Benefits Fund, the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Fund, and the Contingent Fund, among others. Local government units, including MMDA, will be provided with 1.184 trillion pesos, equivalent to 18.6% of the total expenditure program. This allocation pertains mainly to statutory shares of LGUs from national taxes such as the National Tax Allotment and the BARM Annual Block Grant, among others. Let me emphasize that the 1.184 trillion pesos allocation to LGUs excludes the funds for programs under various NGAs which are intended for implementation across regions nationwide. Meanwhile, the budgetary support to government-owned and controlled corporations composed of subsidy equity and net lending assistance to government corporations will amount to 204.5 billion pesos or 3.2% of the proposed budget for next year. This includes substantial allocations for implementing the National Health Insurance Program or PhilHealth and the irrigation projects of the National Irrigation Administration, among others. Finally, some 848 billion pesos will be allocated to the government's creditors as interest payments, representing 13.3% of the proposed 2025 budget. Of the proposed fiscal year 2025 budget, some 4.057 trillion pesos or 63.9% will be directly allocated to the regions. Of this amount, NCR will be allocated with 857.9 billion, Luzon with 1.538 trillion pesos, Visayas with 721 billion pesos, and Mindanao with 940.3 billion pesos. The remaining 36.1% or 2.295 trillion pesos pertains to the non-regionalized budget. This is composed of the nationwide and central office allocations amounting to 1.725 trillion and 570.3 billion pesos respectively. Meanwhile, here are the top 10 allocations. Education remains our top priority with 977.6 billion or about 15.4% of the proposed national budget. Health will be allocated with 297.6 billion to continue the advanced implementation of the Universal Healthcare Act while fully recovering and rebuilding from the pandemic. The Department of Social Welfare and Development will get 230.1 billion pesos to fund social protection programs including the Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program and the social pension for indigent senior citizens. Towards making our own agricultural output our source of food security, agriculture will be given 211.3 billion pesos to support our farmers and fisher folk. And to finance the flagship Build Better More infrastructure program, our key strategy to propel economic growth, the Department of Public Works and Highways will be allocated with 900 billion pesos or 14.2% of the proposed budget. Meanwhile, the Department of Transportation will receive the highest increase with its 2025 allocation more than doubling to 180.9 billion from 74 billion pesos in 2024. We likewise note the significant increases for fiscal year 2025 proposed budget. In terms of sectors, the health sector will receive the significant budget increases, with the operations of DOH hospitals in Metro Manila increasing by 23.6%, while the operations of DOH regional hospitals and other health facilities will increase by 41%. Under the education sector, we will also double the teaching allowance of teachers from 5,000 to 10,000 given the recent enactment of the Kabalikat sa Pagtuturo Act. Consequently, the allotment will increase by over 100%. For social protection, the budget for cash gifts for elderly will increase substantially from 186.12 million pesos to 3 billion pesos, which is roughly 1,000% increase given the expanded implementation of the Centenarian Act. We will drastically improve the country's prison facilities with construction of more jail buildings and facilities of the PJMP increasing by more than 5,000% from only 64.46 million this year to 3.85 billion in 2025. The judiciary will also be given prioritization with a strategic plan for judicial innovations receiving 516.4% boost. And the budget for revised AFP modernization program will also increase by 25% to 50 billion pesos. These are just some of the key dimensions and highlights of the fiscal year 2025 National Expenditure Program, which we have turned over to you well within the 30-day period required by the Constitution, or exactly 1 week after the President's State of the Nation address. On this note, may we recall the words of our President at the SONA, and I quote, "We expect all agencies to ensure that every centavo allocated will be judiciously spent for our urgent priorities and socially impactful programs." We have worked very hard to make our proposed national expenditure program align with our Philippine Development Plan, bearing in mind our need to stay on track with our agenda for prosperity and our goals of fulfilling the needs and aspirations of the Filipino people under a bagong Pilipinas. Let us together fulfill the dreams of our people and for our nation. Mabuhay ang mga Pilipino at mabuhay ang bagong Pilipinas. At this point, for a better appreciation of the National Expenditure Program, I invite everyone to watch our audiovisual presentation on the specific priority expenditures under the proposed national budget. Maraming salamat po.
The Philippines, a frontrunner and key player among Asia's emerging economies, outpacing Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and China in the first quarter of 2024. We remain on track with our agenda for prosperity. Building on our gains, we strive to fulfill the needs and aspirations of the Filipino people. Equivalent to 22.1% of GDP, the proposed national budget for fiscal year 2025 is 6.352 trillion pesos. Meticulously crafted and anchored on the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028, the budget aims to develop and protect the capabilities of individuals and families, transform production sectors to generate more quality jobs and produce competitive products, foster an enabling environment that will promote macroeconomic stability and improve public services. To reduce the medical expenses of the poor, we will allocate 74.4 billion pesos to subsidize the health insurance premiums of indirect contributors under PhilHealth. We will provide medical assistance to millions of financially incapacitated patients and construct more accessible health facilities, including the Bagong Urgent Care and Ambulatory Service or Bukas centers. We are investing heavily in education with 977.6 billion pesos or 15.4% of the proposed budget. We have built almost 3,000 classrooms in 2023 and will construct 6,000 more in 2025 with 29.3 billion pesos for the Basic Education Facilities Program. We will bridge the digital divide through more than 18,000 e-classroom packages and almost 100 million textbooks and other instructional materials for all public schools. For our teachers, the Kabalikat sa Pagtuturo Act will double the teaching allowance from 5,000 pesos to 10,000 pesos. And for our students, the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Program, which will provide scholarships to millions, will receive 53.1 billion pesos.
Isa ang CHED sa mga nagtigaan upang makapagtapos po ako ng pag-aaral. I was so blessed dahil sa CHED, my father did not have to think about my tuition and miscellaneous fees.
To reduce the vulnerabilities of our people, we are transforming the country's social protection system. The Pambansang Pabahay para sa Pilipino program will provide decent and affordable housing with 1.8 billion pesos, while the implementation of the Centenarian Act will be expanded with 3 billion pesos to provide cash benefits to senior citizens above 80 years old.
Whatever current data proudly bannering our country as among the best performing in Asia means nothing to a Filipino who is confronted by the price of rice at 45 to 65 pesos per kilo.
The Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program will receive a higher allocation of 114.2 billion pesos for education and health grants and rice subsidies to no less than 4.4 million households.
Nung dumating po ang Pantawid sa amin, malaking tulong po, nakakabili na po ako ng gamit ng mga anak ko sa school, lalong-lalo na po yung gamot po ng anak ko. Ang rice po, malaking bagay din po sa Tagalog at saka sa katutubo.
We will provide additional grants for pregnant and lactating mothers to ensure the health and nutrition of children for their first 1,000 days. We will also give cash-based assistance through the food stamp program. To strengthen food security and address inflation, we are boosting local production with an increased allocation of 31.4 billion pesos for the National Rice Program. And we will construct an additional 1,541 kilometers of farm-to-market roads and introduce solar-powered fertigation systems to boost high-value crop farming. To generate not only decent but competitive jobs, we will harmonize our livelihood and employment programs with 36.8 billion pesos. We will intensify our technical and vocational education and training through TESDA with 18.7 billion pesos.
Maraming salamat po talaga sa TESDA. Sana po lahat po ng mga nag-aalangan na hanapin yung gusto nilang gawin sa buhay, meron pong TESDA na kaagapay ninyo.
The Tulong Panghanap Buhay sa Ating Disadvantaged Workers or TUPAD program provided jobs to over 3 million displaced workers in 2023 and will continue to support millions more in 2025.
Nagpapasalamat kami dako nga naapilmi di aning programa sa Doli Tupad. Kay dako ug kayon ning nga nakatabang sa among pangadlaw-adlaw nga panginabuhi.
We will create even more jobs through the MSME Development Program, the Shared Service Facilities Project, and Negosyo Centers. And to further revitalize industries, we will continue to implement the Green Lane for strategic investments. To drive innovation, we will increase the allocation for research and development to 23.2 billion pesos. We have also launched our Malikhaing Pinoy program and will continue to support our creative industries. To sustain the momentum of the tourism industry, we will promote the Philippine Experience Program and local food tourism. The halal food industry will also get a boost of 286.4%. To combat graft and corruption, we are allocating 70.6 billion pesos to rapidly digitalize our bureaucracy. This covers the advancement of our public financial management program with 575 million pesos, while 3.1 billion pesos will be invested to digitalize revenue collection.
With our online registration update system or yung ORIS na tinatawag natin, napapadali nito ang pag-update at pag-transact sa BIR at the comforts of the taxpayers' home.
To further improve bureaucratic efficiency, we allotted 70 billion pesos for the increase in salaries and 9.6 billion pesos for additional healthcare benefits of government employees. To ensure transparent, digitalized, and reliable midterm elections, 15 billion pesos will be allocated for automated national and local election activities, including the additional honoraria of poll watchers. The Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections will also be supported with 11.6 billion pesos. To secure the country's territorial integrity, we will strengthen our land, air, and naval forces defense programs with a revised AFP modernization program budget increasing to 50 billion pesos to address recent developments in the West Philippine Sea. To further propel economic growth, we have allocated 5.7% of GDP or 1.51 trillion pesos for the Build Better More infrastructure program. We will build better and build more with 900 billion pesos allocated for the Department of Public Works and Highways. Meanwhile, the budget of the Department of Transportation will increase to 180.9 billion pesos to support the completion of central railway systems, subways and busways, maritime, and other public transport projects. And we will continue to build world-class air transportation systems through the Aviation Infrastructure Program. To accelerate climate action, our climate change expenditures more than doubled to 1 trillion pesos. We have harmonized government efforts to improve every Filipino's access to clean and potable water with 309.7 billion pesos. To accelerate access to water supply and sanitation services of lagging municipalities, 1 billion pesos is allotted to the Support and Assistance Fund to Participatory Budgeting. This covers the construction of climate-smart evacuation centers. The Green 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 program, which will support local government units in building open spaces and infrastructure for active mobility, will receive 1 billion pesos. And to enhance disaster resilience, we will provide 417.9 billion pesos for the government's Risk Resiliency Program. The Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao will be supported with 94.4 billion pesos. To strengthen fiscal decentralization, LGUs will receive a share of 1 trillion pesos from the national tax allotment, higher by 18.7%. Indeed, we are ushering a new era where local governments are the shining beacons of sustainable and inclusive development.
We look to the cooperation of our colleagues in the legislature, not only that our proposed national budget be approved in your usual timely manner, but it be adhered to as closely as possible.
Our proposed national budget reflects our unwavering commitment to promoting the sound, efficient, and effective management and utilization of government resources. Sa pamamagitan ng budget na ito, ipagpapatuloy po natin ang ating nasimulan upang lalo pa nating maialay ang ating taus-pusong serbisyo sa ating mga kababayan sa ilalim ng bagong Pilipinas. Pagsikapan natin na paigtingin at palaguin palalo ang ating ekonomiya upang ating mabigyang daan ang kaunlaran at ang mga pangarap ng ating mga kababayan.
Maraming salamat po. We are now ready to answer your questions.
But before we break for lunch, we acknowledge the presence of Secretary Frederick Go, Special Assistant to the President for Investment and Economic Affairs. Welcome to the House of Representatives, sir. So the budget briefing is suspended until 1:15. Right? So see you at 1:15. So we will resume at the Romualdez Hall. 1:15. Romualdez Hall. Yes, suspended. It's a reminder, we will...
Announcement, may we advise everyone that we will resume at 1:15 in the afternoon at Romualdez Hall. Again, 1:15 at Romualdez Hall. Thank you.